want to get around that. There are ways to do it. But actually, I'm glad you asked, because there's an initiative with a couple of different organizations, including MAD. It's actually called DADS, D-A-D-S-S, which I think is kind of neat. And I can't remember now exactly what the acronym is, but it's essentially a detection device that would be built into all new cars. They're in the testing phase now. So you wouldn't have to actually blow into a tube, just your breath and your touch could be measured to make sure that you weren't above the 0.08, and the car would then start. So if you were, I think even sitting in the passenger seat, if you were at least in the front seat, you would have to both be sober enough to start the car. Now, granted, can you still get somebody to start the car and they jump out and somebody else jumps in? And yeah, but then you're back to the social issue of we all need to try to help other people realize when they're not making a good decision to try to get in between them and them creating their own disaster.
The case I heard of, it was a kid, so kids are like, hey, I'm not gonna.
And that's just, it's horrible. And in the last few months of the cases I've seen in the news, there have been several parents who've caused the crash that has killed one or more of their children. And I just can't imagine how you get to that point in your decision making, even after drinking, where you would think that would be okay. But yeah, so they're trying to get the technology improved, but also mass produced.
I think they should probably install something like where it's like, I got like FaceTime this guy, like when they have like customer service, like we got a really right now, like
Yeah.
a camera in the car that sees that you're in the car, and then you like visually have to blow in.
Yeah, for offenders, or especially repeat offenders,
Yeah,
that would be,
that, and you
right,
have to have
right.
it going there.
Right.
So have the camera in so it sees, like operators see that you're the one going into it.
Yeah,
Because
good point.
getting around it, it's the driver purpose.
Yeah, true.
A lot of you mentioned that the whole point is to prevent alcohol consumption when you're drinking and driving. And as said, that you can't prevent people from drinking in general because it's such a huge franchise and celebration and so many different types of cultures that you can't just take it away from the world. So my question is really then how do we initially prevent it? Because all of you mentioned that we should. My question is how? I mean, should we imply some sort of law that says that you cannot drink more than 0.8% of alcohol consumption in your body? Or because rules have been made that you can't drink and drive, but yet people do. So what other measures do you think the world or our United States community should take in order to prevent this?
We tried banning alcohol in the United States. It didn't go well.
A lot of people got rich selling it.
Yes. And we actually, that was what allowed organized crime to get a strong foothold in a lot of different areas. So it's very clear that this is a country, I used to say this when I was younger, and I'll trot this out because it's kind of controversial. We are an alcoholic country. We are addicted to alcohol just like we're addicted to petroleum, just like we're addicted to the internet. All right, there's a lot of things out there that we just decided we can't live without. It's no accident. I mean, think of the federal agency who's responsible for the regulation of alcohol. It's the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. All right, 3 very dangerous, potentially fatal things. They're all together in the same agency. What does that tell you? We know what the dangers are. We've always known what the dangers are. And we've been reticent to regulate it too strongly because that's an imposition on our freedom. But on the other hand, as Imam Musri pointed out, we're more than willing to invest huge amounts of resources in something which might happen on an outside chance, maybe perhaps if somebody was really, really out there. All right. So I think the the difficulty is, what we're talking about here is changing a culture. And until such time as the Super Bowl, is being sponsored by, I don't know, by Dasani Water, and not by Anheuser-Busch, until it's less romantic, until it's really until there's sort of a cultural shift, a paradigm shift, like there was with tobacco. And that required somebody to do a lot of digging. It required a populist movement that said, you've known what this does for a really long time. We're not telling you to go out of business, but we're telling you that we're holding you responsible for what you're doing. You're making a lot of money. And by the way, the tobacco industry, you notice the tobacco industry in the United States has not disappeared as a result. That's because it's all gone overseas. And where countries overseas, and I want to shift this to tobacco, but when countries overseas have tried to pass laws for labeling, they have been sued by American tobacco producers, and those little countries can't afford to defend themselves. So they've had to repeal their packaging warning laws. So that, we can stand tough here, but the issue is a human one. It's a cultural one. And changing culture is probably the most difficult thing you can possibly do.
Do you think that we've already started in this alcohol that we're trying to prevent? Do you think our nation ourselves has actually started making a change, or?
I think there's some, I do believe that, the campaign saying don't drink and drive is already conceding some ground. It's saying drink, but don't drive after you drink. Drinking's okay as long as you don't get in a car or don't get behind the wheel. I don't know that, as a parent, that doesn't seem to me to be an effective way of setting a limit, but.
Even if you don't drive, alcohol, if you're consuming alcohol, you can do so much more damage in any sort of sense.
Right. We're not going to get to the statistics on domestic violence and alcohol.
Or just
If-
literally falling down drunk.
Right.
Right, people are in the emergency room falling down drunk. I think, I agree, I wish we could just say, just don't abuse alcohol. I think the soft sell, if you will, of the don't drink and drive is to get us at least somewhere. And there have been improvements since the 70s when it was very socially acceptable. Super socially acceptable. But I can't say all the states are the same. I talk to parents who've lost kids who live especially in like the Wisconsin, middle, north, and they don't prosecute there. Oh, well, they didn't mean it. It's a very low arrest and prosecution record. So it's a tough one, but I think it's totally it's so socially acceptable, and how do you switch that around?
But
Very
I
hard.
do believe that we have seen within society numerous trends that have changed. Where things just aren't the way they used to be. We don't tell chauvinistic jokes as much as we used to, because it's just not socially acceptable. And I believe that increasingly there's a recognition that at events you need to have non-alcoholic alternatives. So you're not depriving anybody of their alcohol, but non-alcoholic alternatives. Even vegetarianism is the same kind of thing. It used to be that was way out there. Now the idea that you ask for a vegetarian alternative, and it's like, yeah, that's within the realm of humanity at least, And these things are slow to come. But one of the reasons that I don't drink is that I want to be there for the person who really can't afford to drink. And when I say can't afford to, because they can't control it well. So the fact that I'm not drinking doesn't make him or her look out of place because they're not drinking. And it only takes a relatively small percentage, 10%, 15%, who choose not to drink, who make it much more comfortable for people who are kind of, well, I'd really rather not drink, but I don't want to look weird. And so we create, the freedom for them to make a decision. And they don't have to make the decision my way, but if, I want to give them that option.
I want to say that no amount of laws and policing can really stop someone who wants to drink and then, or stop someone who is drunk from driving. The statistics have shown over the several decades that the problem is not going away. Only internal policing, if you have that will to say, I'm not going to drink, period. That's the only way this can stop. So we're not advocating the U.S. change its laws like the prohibition back in the 1920s, but to really bring a strong culture to say this is something abhorrent, this is something negative, something we don't look favorably on, not celebrate it as, Rabbi Kay said, if you watch it on the Super Bowl in the ads, we are all paying for it and saying it's something good, but it's not. We have to call it as it is. It's an evil that is plaguing our society. So as a religious leader, I say the purpose of faith, the purpose of religion is to give you certain strong beliefs that say there is no amount of money in the world you can pay me to make me drink an ounce of alcohol, okay? There is no purpose for it. That's religious conviction. Laws don't make you, there are times when you can get away doing what you want outside the law. But knowing that this is who you are, these are your principles and values, God is always watching, you will not, drink no matter what. And that's what I would advocate is you don't have to accept my religion, but accept this part of religion that is really in many religions. In Christianity and Judaism, there's a lot of people who say we don't drink, period. And that's what I think is the good part of religion that we need to bring back.
So I had a question on what does the panelists feel is if there's even a difference between the legalization of alcohol and the potential legalization of recreational marijuana?
For us in Islam, any drug that intoxicates your mind, takes away your ability to think clearly at all times, is prohibited. It doesn't matter what name, what label, how it is in liquid form or powder form. It is because the human being is gifted with the mind to be able to make good decisions. And once you cloud that mind and take away the ability to make clear decisions, that substance, regardless what it is, what name it has, is prohibited.
I just personally would add, I feel very strongly, not necessarily legalization, but just marijuana in particular. Our middle son, Nathan, I watched him go from a very smart, wonderful child into a middle schooler who found alcohol and marijuana and literally became a changed person in many ways, and all because, his brain just started being different. And luckily he got past some of that, but it was a permanent change to him. And so I just feel very strongly that you need to be very careful whatever you put in your body. Being someone, who could lose a few pounds, I've got the whole food issue, I recognize that. But there are a lot of things you just need to be really super careful. I mentioned, in our story it involved the Four Locos. The reason it's not so caffeinated anymore is because it was actually killing college students. It was giving them heart attacks at age 20 and 22. And the lawsuits came out and they had to change what was in that beer. So just, think about your body and what goes in, no matter what it is. But yeah, I have to say I'm the vote no on.
I mean, you know, there's a lot of layers to that issue, and one of them is the number of is the way the laws have come down, the way criminalization of marijuana has been handled, and that this is like a whole other program, I think, on how we what we make illegal and how we make it illegal and the way we do things. But the fact of the matter is that there are there's a disproportionate number of young people, particularly young men, who are languishing in prison because you know, they had a comparatively small amount of marijuana in their possession, or were under the influence, and you know, yet if they had been drinking in the park and were blackout drunk, you know, they would have just been brought home and you know, allowed to sober up or thrown in the drunk tank overnight. So we have and that kind of brings us back to what we were talking about before. We have a disproportionate response to those intoxicants. I will say this, hailing back to my band days, I was not a pot smoker, but most of the rest of the guys in my band were. As the night went on, we'd play a 3-set night. As the night went on, they thought they were playing better and better. And I knew they were not, as a matter of fact, but they were sure that they were. And finally, after about 2 years, I said, you know, you guys really, just one time, I want one of you to stay straight with me during the course of a night and evaluate how we were playing as a band by the end of the night versus how we were playing at the beginning of the night when you guys went out on, you know, on set breaks and you know, and smoked up. One guy who was actually probably the most frequent user of recreational marijuana decided to do that. He was the drummer. And he came back and he said, I'm done. I'm not smoking anymore, at least not while we were playing. He didn't smoke. So, I mean, again, it's sort of like, you know, it's sort of as with alcohol, you know, and pretty much what Jim was saying at the beginning, you know, how many of you here would say, you know, I've made the best decisions of my life when I was drunk? You know, I made the best decisions of my life when I was high, all right? Clearly, if you were to list the top 10 poorest decisions that you ever made, have you ever, and if you use recreational alcohol or marijuana, every single one of those things on your top 10 list is going to be during one of those periods of time. So, I mean, I think that sort of explains it all.
All right, any,
Before we end, I want
Yes.
to, you know, more recently, texting and